The leaders of France and Germany have just wrapped up their emergency meetings on the situation. Germany saying there is still room for Greece to negotiate its way out of the financial crisis, but it wants the Greek Prime Minister to make a serious proposal in Brussels tomorrow. Greek banks are on the brink of running out of funds, and the country may be on the verge of leaving the Eurozone. The White House has just weighed in on that, saying today any resolution of the debt crisis should keep Greece in the Eurozone. We'll see over the next 2 days. Yesterday, Greek voters were asked if they accepted the strict terms of an international bailout. They answered with an emphatic no, over 60%. Today, the massive uncertainty spawned by that result has politicians and bureaucrats across the continent scrambling for a new solution. No more than Francois Hollande and Angela Merkel. They, as I say, just wrapped up their meetings. They say they respect Greece's vote against the terms of an international bailout, and they added the door remains open to negotiations with the Greek government to find a way to keep the country in the 19-country Eurozone.
The no result, unfortunately, widens the gap between Greece and other Eurozone countries.
Senior European officials say yesterday's no result in the referendum has made negotiations on a bailout much more difficult, though. They say they're determined to keep Greece in the Eurozone, but they won't cave in, they say, to any new demands from Athens. Inside Greece itself, Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras called in all party leaders today. 3 opposition parties have now signed a declaration backing his tough stance with creditors. Our Jeff Semple is in the Greek capital with the latest on today's developments.
We've seen a flurry of emergency meetings happening right across Europe today, Carol, as European officials scramble to respond to yesterday's resounding response. 61% of Greeks saying, oh, no to those austerity measures that are being demanded by Greece's creditors in return for more bailout money, funds that Greece desperately needs. Now, as you mentioned, Angela Merkel, the German Chancellor, meeting right now with the French President Francois Hollande to try and come up with some type of response there. The German Chancellor spoke with the Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras on the phone a little bit earlier today, and Mr. Tsipras reportedly told Mrs. Merkel that he planned to present a new proposal for a new deal at that emergency summit of the European Union to be held in Brussels tomorrow. And Alexis Tsipras himself was a busy man today, as you might expect, holding a meeting here just behind me at the Greek Parliament with Greek party leaders for several hours to try and come up with that proposal. But as you mentioned, one person not at that meeting today was Greece's controversial finance minister. He resigned. It's believed at the request of the Greek Prime Minister. The finance minister was not a popular man among European officials after he accused them of terrorism, suggesting that they were trying to terrify Greeks into voting yes to austerity, and even suggested he'd rather cut off his hand than accept the austerity measures being proposed. So he has stepped aside. His successor, a man who's also known to be far left-leaning, but also much more mild-mannered, hoping that he might have some more success at that critical meeting tomorrow. And the other significant development that happened here today, Carol, is that 4 of the large opposition parties in Greek Parliament changed their support and moved in support of the Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras. They had opposed him leading up to the referendum yesterday. They've now signed a letter signifying their support. So the Greek Prime Minister goes into tomorrow's meeting with the opposition support and the clear support of the Greek people, a stronger position that he has had up to this point, Carol.
Yeah, France believes that they can actually pull this off, depending on what proposal the Prime Minister brings to the table tomorrow. But for Greeks on the street, they have a more immediate concern, and that is their money in the bank. It is not an exaggeration to say that the banks are on the verge of collapse.
They are indeed. They are literally about to run out of money at any point, really. It's hard to say exactly when, though the Greek government says that the banks have enough cash left to last until Friday of this week. As we've been reporting, Greeks are for the last week, have only been allowed to withdraw 60 euros per person per day. I was just at an ATM machine down the street talking to a woman who said she drove around to a few banks before she finally found an ATM that still had cash in it. Every night before midnight, you see the lineups at the ATMs. again, with people trying to get the cash for the next day and worried that that day might be their last opportunity to get any cash at all. So there is a lot of anxiety here, knowing now, if the Greek government is right, that they still have a few days, that the banks can last until Friday. The hope, of course, is that a deal would be done by then, and if not, that perhaps the European Central Bank might be willing to step in and provide a lifeline to keep the banks afloat as the discussion continues. But if that happens, things could get very desperate here very quickly, and a Grexit would seem all but inevitable, Carol.
The CBC's Jeff Semple in Athens. So a lot of focus on those Greek banks and what will happen, and if anything that does happen will reach the shores of our country. Jeannie Lee joins me now. First of all, Jeannie, what's the latest there on the Greek bank situation?
Well, Carol, we just heard from the European Central Bank, which issued a press release moments ago, and it can be interpreted as putting more pressure on Greek banks, because there's a line in there that suggests that when the Greek banks come to the ECB in the future for loans against collateral that the banks hold, that the ECB might give out less cash than it has been up till now in exchange for those promises backed by collateral. So there's that that's happening. The other thing is, you mentioned Angela Merkel earlier. She said, yes, everyone's open to discussing a proposal, but she added an important caveat. She reminded everybody that there is a process and some pretty complex rules in place when trying to access the ESM, which is a European stability mechanism, that, sort of emergency funding for countries in trouble. So that's a hint that it may be a tougher process than Greeks might think that it is. So all of this unfolding, and of course markets are watching all of this. We saw that globally investors, we can say, are nervous but not panicky. Early on, Asian markets, for example, they were the first to open after the vote results were counted, and the Hong Kong and Tokyo markets did drop by about 2 to 3%. But European markets were next to open, and they closed down about 1 to 2%. These are not massive losses. They're significant, but they're not massive for a day. So that's possibly because there is the sense that talks at least are still ongoing. Whether they'll yield anything or not, there is at least some hope of a resolution still.
And especially when you hear people like the White House and others saying, we do hope for a negotiation and we do want Greece to stay in the Eurozone. Exactly. That gives investors some hope that at least there's the will out there to make that happen.
There is still some will out there.